I'm going to say a little bit about who we are and maybe touch a bit on our strategic roadmap, what DG's mentioned for the next 5 years, but with 3 main focus areas. I think the beautiful book is actually inside the gift, inside the bag, inside the knee, that explain in details what our initiative for the next 5 years. Okay, so Labuan International Financial Center has been established and declared on 1st October 1990. Prior to 1996, there are 3 competent authorities that regulate the center. So we have the Bank Negara Malaysia that oversees the financial institutions such as banks and insurance. And then we have the Securities Commissions of Malaysia that oversees the capital market sector. And we have Companies Commissions Malaysia that oversees the incorporation and act as registrar of companies. But since 1996, for more than 30 years, we have been declared as a single regulatory authority, Labuan FSA, which we undertake 3 functions of the domestic authorities, but oversees the international financial center. So it's important here to distinguish ourselves. What is Labuan IBFC? What is domestic onshore? So our mandate is to promote and develop Labuan as an IFC. We also responsible to be a central regulatory, supervisory and enforcement authorities of the IFC. And lastly, we also responsible to develop the national objectives, policies and priorities for the developments of the center as well as the Labuan Island. So this is a little bit of the organizational structures. You some of you may not know that Labuan IBFC is under whom. So we are actually same as Bank Negara and SC, which we are under the Ministry of Finance. So our structures, okay, we have our advisory groups, we have our authority members, which consist from the Securities Commission, Bank Negara, and the IRB, as well as the MOF within our board members. So Labuan FSA is also the shareholders of 2 subsidiaries, one of it that manage the international school in Labuan, and we have our marketing arm, Labuan IBFC Inc., which help us to promote the center internationally. So being a single regulatory authority, we have our own set of legislation. So under Labuan IBFC, we have 7 laws being enacted that govern the center. So we have, the first one is the Labuan FSA, is our law, our act that specified the powers, the functions and responsibilities of Labuan FSA. We have the Labuan Companies Act, which is similar to the, more or less similar to the Companies Act in Malaysia. And then we have the Labuan Financial Services and Securities Act that govern the regulated activities such as bank, insurance, capital market. And then we have one independent law for Islamic. So it is a very comprehensive legislation for both conventional and Sharia compliant market. And then we have the trusts and foundations that govern the wealth management structure. And lastly, we have the limited partnerships law. As far as we have our own set of law, the tax collections or the tax requirements are still within the competent authorities of Inland Revenue Board of Malaysia. But for Labuan industry players, they have to comply with the requirement in a different tax act that we call Labuan Business Activity Tax Act. Which is different set of law from the Income Tax Act, but the competent authority is still IRB. Although Labuan is an island, an international financial center, we are still in Malaysia. We are still within Malaysia. So there is a relevant acts that we are committed and adhered to, especially on the MLCFD requirements, the Mutual Assistance in Criminal Matters, the Corruptions Act, the National Anti-Finance Crime Act, and of course the Bank Negara's foreign exchange notices. So after 30 years of establishment, I can say that Labuan IBFC remains relevant, internationally recognized and well-developed IFC. This is evidenced by the membership that we have actually been accepted in the international organization and association such as GIICS that look at the insurance supervisories. We are also a member of FATF and APG in terms of MLCFT. We are also members of IFSB and IIFM. And for the international assessment, I think being an international financial center, it is important that we've been assessed by these international bodies. We have been assessed as a low-risk jurisdiction for MLCFT requirements. This is important because the perceptions always have that international financial center is where MLCFT risks are there. But as far as Labuan IBFC is concerned, we are low-risk jurisdiction. In terms of tax transparency, exchange of information, and tax practices, Labuan IBFC is considered as largely compliant and a not harmful tax jurisdiction. On that side, like DG mentioned just now on our niche market, which is captive insurance, why it is there? Because we have been chosen and been awarded and recognized as the best Asian domicile for people to set up captive insurance business. I will explain a bit of the captive, but if you want to understand more, I think the teams are here to provide more insight. Okay, what is the fiscal structure? So for the tax structure, it's a little bit of different from the domestic. Labuan players being taxed 3% out of the total net audited profits. It is much more lower, but that is a limitation and restrictions of business that can be conducted by the Labuan industry players. For the non-trading income, example, the investment holding activities will be taxed at 0%. We have actually since 2019, we have issued a clear and prescribed substance requirements based on the business activities via a gazette order issued by the Parliament. So these substance requirements describe the presence that you need to have when you establish a Labuan entities. Other benefits, there are certain exemptions given to Labuan industry players. So like exemptions from the stamp duties, dividends, access to more than 70 DTAs, and for Labuan entities, there are no restriction. It can be owned 100% by foreigners. And of course, it has to access to live. So these benefits is being discussed frequently with our other domestic agency like IRB, MOF, to see how best that we can ensure that Labuan IBFC remains competitive as compared to other IFC. Okay, so this is the most important part, which is the difference between Labuan IBFC and the domestic onshore Malaysia. So we have our independent legal and tax framework. So we are not based on the existing framework in Malaysia. Our clientele are mainly non-resident. So we are focusing more on out business. Like DG mentioned, most of our like captive or what, it is from international business. It's not Malaysian business. For currency denominations, the transactions conducted in Labuan is predominantly non-ringgit. So we are international business. Must remember that we are focusing. We are not here to compete with the Malaysian industry. We are complement. After all, we are in Malaysia. So the business scope for Labuan is more on wholesale basis. Why I say wholesale? We are targeting corporate entities. So in Labuan, you wouldn't see an offshore bank have over-the-counter activities like what Maybank or CMB we have. If you want to set up an account, you have to go to their international office. We have no exchange control because we are not allowed to deal in ringgit because there's limitations set out in the foreign exchange control. And lastly, the regulatory authorities, Labuan FSA, whilst in domestic, as I mentioned just now, is regulated by BNM, SC, and SSM. So this is some of the business control imposed to Labuan entities. In Labuan, you're not permitted to undertake cash transaction. I think this is why MLCFT raised. You wouldn't see people with a briefcase with thousands of cash inside the bag. No, in Labuan, none. So it's all being done in not over the counter, or it's not physical cash. So we are not permitted, the industry is not permitted to provide check facilities, nor bearer instruments, confine dealings with wholesale clients, must have a physical presence, and of course regularly reporting to Labuan FSA. So this is a little bit of the industries that Labuan IBFC has, from the companies, the leasing, the capital market, banking, trust company, digital market, insurance, wealth management, as well as the commodity trading. This is the products and services that Labuan IBFC offered. So as at 2021, I think DG's figure is the latest one, but I just go for the others that we not mentioned just now. So we are home of 67 banks, which consists of the full-fledged commercial bank and investment bank. We have more than 200 insurance and insurance intermediaries. So we have direct, reinsurance, captive, brokers and managers. We have more than 90 digital players, 40 commodity traders, which is licensed under the Global Incentive Trading Program. We have more than 200 leasing companies, so most of our leasing are operating in operating lease, and with the total lease asset value of $39.8 billion US dollar. And then we have for the wealth management structure, we have more than 100 non-charitable foundations and 16 registered trusts. So this is, I think it's more familiar. It is in the roadmap. So this is our strategic roadmap, which was launched in June. So this set out what that we want to do for the next 5 years. So like I mentioned, I'll be focusing on 3 main areas, i.e. the digital, the Islamic finance, and the insurance, particularly in captive. So in this diagram, if you can see, we have divided it into 3 pillars. So the right hand side is focusing more on business stream, what that we want to enhance, expand the scope of business to ensure that Labuan can give a lot of products and services and enhance our opportunities to go further. But the business must come and balance with the regulatory requirements. So we have the regulatory stream on the left hand side, and it will be supported by the enablers, i.e. the talent as well as the infrastructure. So if you can see under the business stream, there are 3 pillars. The first one is market innovations and vibrancy. The second is to promote market facilitations and visibility. And the third one is to strengthen our complementary roles to Malaysia. All right, so on the Labuan IBFC, transforming Labuan IBFC into a digital financial hub, I think it's good to give a little bit of explanations on current digital ecosystem in Labuan. So as DG mentioned, our digital financial services varies from the issuances, from the exchanges, from the trading platform, payment facilitation, insurtech, and intermediaries, especially on the advice. So if you look at this, we have we have 35 digital trading platforms that facilitate the listing, the buying and selling of digital currency or cryptocurrency. We have 2 issuance of securities and 17 e-payment system, 18 issuance of digital tokens or asset-backed tokens or utility tokens. We have 3 exchanges being licensed under Section 134, i.e. the Securities Exchange. We have 2 insurtech, 4 robo-advisories, and 10 digital banks, which consists of digital investment bank. Okay. Prior to 2018, in 2018, we have issued 1 circular called Circular on Innovative Financial Services. So this circular is actually to facilitate and guide the industries to conduct digital financial services. So in Labuan, we are based on the existing licensing regime that prescribed under the current Labuan Financial Services and Securities Act, or Labuan Islamic Financial Services and Securities Act. Means that there are no new licenses to conduct this kind of digital financial services. It will be guided by this circular as well as the relevant guidelines attached to that particular activities. So that's why you can see there is no license called digital trading platforms. We use the existing license, i.e. the money broker, to facilitate the trading of the digital currency in their own platform. So we are actually moving towards enhancing these requirements. That's why in the next 5 years, although we have that existing licensing regime, but there's a lot of enhancement need to be done, especially on the operational, prudential governance, and of course ML CFD requirements. So some of our digital financial services falls under the virtual asset service providers, VASP, which will be assessed under the virtual assets risk assessment, i.e. for the ML CFD risk in dealing with virtual assets. So there's a lot to be done to ensure that, yes, this is our licensing licensed entity, but at the same time we want to make sure that these digital players comply with any standards imposed, because there's a lot of risk attached to the activities. So that's what we're going to do for the next 5 years. If you look at the some of the key initiatives, we are more looking at enhancement of the scope and operationals requirements for the banking, formulate digital assets requirements to support the activities of our existing players. And we also, will develop and enhance the exchanges scopes and functions. We have 3 exchanges approved in Labuan, so we want to make sure that the operational requirements be guided by the framework. For the digital environment, it is more on the infrastructure and also the digitizations of the processing within Labuan FSA. So for the IDAC, I don't want to discuss this in details, because it will be discussed in the next panel session, which is more interesting because we have the panelists, which is part of the Islamic Digital Asset Center. So this is the overall diagram on how IDAC, it is similar to the exchanges that we have here, but this is the first exchanges that in accordance with the Sharia compliance activities. So it will be interesting to know in the next panel session. So this is what that the Islamic digital asset and what that we want to do in Labuan. I think some of us, our industry players, Islamic will always actually be our niche market, but the growth might be slow. So this is what we're going to do for the next 5 years to ensure that we bring again the Islamic International Center. I think the nearest one we have the IFC around us, like Singapore and Hong Kong. We are actually I can say number 1 lah kan DG in terms of the Islamic Financial Center, because we have our independent set of law for Islamic, and we have a lot of pronouncements, Sharia guidelines that can guide the Islamic financial services in Labuan. So maybe I give a little bit background of what we're going to do for insurance, but this is more focusing on the self-insurance like DG mentioned. We have a lot of type of captive structures, varies from the pure captive to rental captive. So I just give briefly the structure here. If you want to know more, the team are here. We are, anytime that can explain to you on our captive structure. So we are home to 64 captive. the second highest in the center. We have 8 takaful captive, like DG mentioned. So the next 5 years, we are targeting to have more captive to be set up in Labuan, because the the structures that we have, like for example, protected cell company is the first in the region. So we want to promote more on that utilizations of such captives. Okay, so this is some of the initiatives that we want to focus for the insurance market. So for intra-Labuan insurance business potentials, we are working with Bank Negara Malaysia to ensure that our insurance or our reinsurance can provide support to Malaysian market or the Labuan market. We want to rationalize our captive framework. Yes, the captive guidelines are there, but there is some tuning in that need to be done to make it more attractive and more acceptable. We want to diversify the PCC structure. What is PCC structure? Is kind of special structures like ICC or VCC in Singapore, and it can be done through setting up PCC and conduct a captive insurance business. And of course, the intermediaries are important in Labuan, especially those underwriters, those managers and brokers. So we want to upscale the role because they are our frontliners. We want to ensure that they are capable to manage the Labuan insurance business. I think that's all my briefing today. I hope that I give some insights of Labuan and what we're going to do for the next 5 years. I think that's all. Thank you.